Can you please be seated? Thank you very much. Thank you all and welcome to Anthropology and Social Change and Medicine for Nightmares co-sponsored event, a conversation with John Holloway, or perhaps two lectures offered and given by John Holloway, who is a professor at the University of Guap in Puebla, Mexico, and who is a visiting scholar of Anthropology and Social Change Department. John, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Andre. Thanks, Sean, as well, for setting up the whole event. And thanks to Medicine for Nightmares. I came walking just now. I came walking from the hotel, which is in Union Square, and it suddenly clicked about the name of the bookshop. No? And thank you for the medicine, because coming here is a nightmare. I don't think I've ever seen such a concentrated expression of hopelessness as I saw on the streets coming here. It was really, really shocking. But obviously we're not here to talk about hopelessness. We're here to talk about hope. Hope in hopeless times, but the starting point is hope. But how can we? I suppose that's a little bit what I feel after coming here. How can we talk about hope, and why? Why do we want to talk about hope? What's wrong with us? Why is it that we want to think of hope? Is it some sort of addiction? Are we addicted to hope? Or is it some sort of disease that some of us picked up in our youth and just can't get rid of? Or is it perhaps that kind of walking through the streets to get here and seeing all that hopelessness, you really can't help thinking in the opposite direction and thinking, no, we have to hope. We have to get out of this dreadful situation. And of course, not just walking the streets of San Francisco, but just looking at the world around us and thinking of the dreadful treatment of migrants in all the world, thinking of war and the explosion of militarism in all the world in the last couple of years, thinking, of course, of the climate catastrophe and what it means already in the way in which it threatens human existence. And maybe it's all that you think, well, no, we can't accept that. All that is an untrue world. We have to think beyond that. We have to find hope for a way out. And it's not just, if we think of all those things, it's clear that they're not just individual misfortunes, they're not kind of disconnected aspects of the world. They're really part of a system, aren't they? It's part of a very, very powerful system. And all of these things, I suppose, push us towards despair, but it's a despair that we cannot accept. So, our hope is not just individual hopes, it's hope against the system, against a powerful system. And of course that means revolutionary hope. When we're talking about hope, we are talking about revolution. There has to be a way out. But how can we think of that? How can we talk of revolution when there isn't any revolutionary party worth talking about? When there isn't any country that we can look to and admire and say, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could live there? So hope is also an anxiety, it's an anguish. Does it make sense at all? Or is it just a stupid cliche used by priests and politicians? Is there really a hope of revolution? Or are we mad to think that there might be? So to talk of hope is really to doubt our own sanity. And it has to be. And so, even if we think it's important, probably most of us, I mean, if you're here this evening, and it is because you've some sort of conception of the importance of hope and perhaps also revolutionary hope. But even if we think that, somehow I think we stop talking about it. And it's not necessarily that we give up the idea, but we feel uncomfortable about it and we gradually push it to the side of the desk. And then at some point, without even realizing it, it falls off the desk and it's gone. And it's forgotten. And yes, of course, it's better to focus on practical struggles. You know? Better to focus on practical struggles. And of course, it's important to talk about how awful capitalism is. But there's enough talk about revolution or revolutionary hope. And revolution becomes a sort of taboo. It becomes difficult to talk about, and that's not just because of pressures from the right, which are there all the time, of course, but we ourselves feel uncomfortable about mentioning the word. You know, it's all right to organize wonderful graduate courses on activism, but a graduate degree on revolution would be more complicated. Can we put this up?
Absolutely.
So I think that the revolution or revolutionary hope becomes taboo. And we're part of the process of making it taboo. And I think that in some ways that's very healthy. I think that an awful lot of the talk of revolution of 30, 40 years ago was both authoritarian in concept and abstract. I think it's actually very healthy that people today are focusing more on particular struggles and linking their studies to their activism. But I do think at the same time that letting the concept of revolution just go has serious consequences. There's serious consequences in at least two senses. First, I think that social anger and frustration are growing in the world, but it is not coming towards us. It is going away from us. It is turning against us who are also angry, but thinking of how we can channel that anger into the creation of a different world. And I think that loss of anger, the fact that anger is not coming our way, has a lot to do with a loss of hope. That hopeless anger is extremely dangerous. In Mexico, where I live, thousands of young people have taken up arms in the last 20 years, and thousands have died fighting, but not for the hope of changing society, but in the effort to earn more through the drugs trade. In Argentina at the moment, we are seeing the dramatic change from the uprising of 2001, 2002, the wonderful uprising of 20 years ago, to a surge of support, especially among young people, for the far-right candidate in the coming elections, Javier Milei. And it seems that we are losing the battle of anger, and that has a lot to do with losing the battle of hope. And I think that that's one reason why we have to take up the question of hope. Of hope not just that things will be a bit better next year, hope not just that we'll win a particular struggle, but hope that we can actually overcome the dreadful society that is capitalism. And it's not just on the right. I mean, I think that anger is going away from us tragically. And somehow we have to win it back and say, no, this is our anger. This is our anger against society. It is our anger against the elite. It is our anger against capital. It is our anger. And we must open up a different world with that anger. But it's not just that. I think also that the loss of hope has very significant consequences on the left too. Probably, say, just think of the way. Yeah, that I kind of assume, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, that nobody here will vote for Trump, and probably nobody here is going to join the Proud Boys. But nevertheless, the tabooing of revolutionary anger, I think, has practical consequences, particularly in relation to the question of progressivism. So I think when we kind of forget about hope, revolutionary hope, then we say quite logically, well, there's really no question of creating a radically different society. So let's just see how we can get the best deal within capitalism. But the problem is that the best deal may be, or is likely to be, a tighter integration of people within the structures of the society that is destroying us. And that this is happening very much with the progressive governments that we have in Latin America, for example. And one example that strikes me is the Maya train, the train Maya at the moment, which is one of the big major projects of the AMLO government, of the present government in Mexico, and which will open up a lot of southern Mexico to industrial and touristic development. And of course the argument in favor of it, the argument coming from the institutional left, I suppose, is, well, yeah, I mean, this will eliminate to some degree the poverty of southern Mexico. It will allow people to get jobs. It will mean that they won't have to, their children won't have to migrate to New York. It will reduce unemployment. So of course this is good. Only, and it is, yeah, I suppose that's right, if you think, well, there isn't anything else. No, the only real possibility is integration into capitalism. You know, but we forget that then, that in the process, the construction of the Tren Maya is destroying indigenous communities, destroying other ways of thinking about the relation between people and the world, destroying centers of resistance against capitalist development. So really the question of whether we let, if we let revolutionary hope kind of fall off the table, then we're also changing the grammar of the way we think and the grammar of our politics. Because once you say, well, no, that talk of revolution of 30, 40 years ago, no, it doesn't work. Then of course the whole context of how we think and how we think about political action and how we think about critical theory changes. You know? And of course with the Tren Maya, yes, there'll be more employment. People will be able, instead of working on their fields, they'll be able to serve at tables and clean rooms in hotels. There'll be more prostitution. Yeah, I mean, maybe maybe that's the only way in integration, so that progressivism actually becomes integration into capitalist society, into this wonderful capitalist society in one of the richest cities in the world that I've just been walking through over the last half hour or so. But it's not that revolution, it's not the giving up of revolutionary hope as a sort of betrayal. I don't think that at all. I think there are lots of reasons for thinking, well, yeah, I mean, we have to give up. Probably it was never possible, and even if it was possible, maybe we've lost the opportunity. There are no significant revolutionary parties. There are no attractive communist countries. And the experience of socialist revolutions in the last century was really a disaster. No? So how are those of us, and this is, I suppose, the kind of madness or threat of madness that is there all the time, you know, are those of us who still want to talk about revolution, are we not like the last adherents of the idea that the unicorn was a real animal? A lovely idea, beautiful, but wrong. No. So maybe we have to accept that the idea of revolution and the possibility of revolution, really no, it's not realistic. Or at least what we have to say, I suppose, is that we cannot take those ideas for granted. We have to rethink revolution we have to rethink the significance of revolution and the possibility of revolution all the time. And yet, we still hang on to it, and we still hang on to it not just because of our romantic ideas of a lost youth or whatever. We hang on to it because this society is just so bloody awful. You know, we hang on to it because capitalism is not just an unjust, oppressive, exploitative system, but what has become more and more clear over the last 20 years or so is that it is an extremely destructive system that is destroying the world around it, that is destroying the conditions of human life, that may, and the system that may well be leading us towards human extinction. No. So that even if struggles manage to stop the exploitation of fossil fuels, for example, it's possible, capitalism will still be an extremely exploitative, an extremely destructive system. And it's very likely that the continuation of capitalism as a form of social organization is incompatible with the continuation of human life. So we have to go back to the question of revolution. We have to think, well, what is this hope? How do we think about it? And the material basis, I think, for thinking about revolutionary hope has to be the struggles that are going on all the time, the struggles of people who are saying no to the logic of capital, the struggles of people who are trying to do things in a different way, who say, no, we don't want our communities destroyed by open cast mining or whatever. No, we want to stop the process of global warming. We want to stop the use of fossil fuels and so on. I mean, that seems to me that it has to be the basis for hope. I think that revolution can be understood only as the breaking or the multiplication of breakings of the logic of capital, the multiplication of cracks in the structure of capitalist domination, which was the argument of a previous book called Crack Capitalism. The revolution can be understood only as the recognition, creation, expansion, multiplication, and confluence of such cracks. But I suppose maybe what's upsetting me so much is that that book was, Crack Capitalism, was published in 2010, and capitalism is still there. It hasn't gone away yet. So maybe it's not enough. Maybe we have to think further. Maybe the great problem, of course, and you must be so aware of this if you're studying and involved in activism of different ways. The great problem is what the Zapatistas describe as the hydra of capitalism. You know, we chop off one head and three more heads sprout in its place. You know, it's the enormous capacity of capital to just suck us back into a system of exploitation and destruction. The hydra that is money, the hydra that is capital. We win one battle against capital, and capital. We stop open cast mining, and capital just goes and invests somewhere else. So I suppose what I want to say is that we have to relearn hope. Ernst Bloch, the author of the wonderful 3-volume book, The Principle of Hope, which you must have read, and which you haven't read, you must read and fall in love with. You know, that Ernst Bloch returned to Germany after being in exile in the United States during the war, and declared, now is the time to learn hope, which was a very brave assertion after the experience of fascism. A very brave assertion that really went in the opposite direction to that of Adorno, for example, who also returning to Germany after the war said, now we can no longer, it is impossible, after what has happened, it is no longer possible to write poetry. And I think for Bloch to kind of head off in the opposite direction, saying, no, now we have to learn hope. Now we have to think completely in the opposite direction, was an amazing thing to do. And to learn hope, and the idea of learning hope, means that, Bloch was interested in a reasoned hope, what he called a docta spes. The basis for a scientific, reasoned hope for him is the presence of the not yet in the existing world. The presence of the world that is not yet, but could be, perhaps will be. For him, this not yet, this pushing towards another world, can be seen in all aspects of human activity and culture, from fairy tales to dance, to music, to religion, and it acquires practical force with the rise of the working class. And I think for us, this notion that the only way really to think of radical change is to think of the forces of the present existence of a world that could be radically different, that is right. But we don't have the same context anymore. We don't have the same confidence, perhaps, in the rise of the revolutionary working class. For him, still embodied at that time, I think, in the communist parties. And I think we don't see it in that terms anymore. The whole context of change, of hope has changed. So I think that's why I feel it's not just a question of repeating what Bloch says, but we have to actually relearn hope. We have to go back and learn hope again. A reasoned hope, not just, I hope we'll get to a different sort of society, but a reasoned hope. I mean, how is it that in this moment when everything seems to be going against us, how is it that in this moment when it becomes even embarrassing to talk about revolution, how is it that we can still think of revolutionary hope? And that is a question, of course. It's a question that remains a question because we don't know the answers. It's a question of wonderful Zapatista saying, preguntando caminamos, asking we walk. It's crucial. But I think there are three things that we can say. One, I think, is that we have to say no to historical materialism in its classic sense. History is not on our side. It is no longer possible to accept the old historical materialist or crude Marxist idea that historical progress is taking us through capitalism and that we will come out the other side to communism. Rather, I think history has been and continues to be a dynamic of destruction, a train leading us towards catastrophe. So revolution cannot be seen as the fulfillment of a human trajectory, but rather as the pulling of the emergency brake, as Walter Benjamin put it. So I think first thing is no, we can no longer have that idea that history is on our side. Second thing I think we have to say is that revolutionary transformation or radical social transformation cannot come about through the state. That anti-capitalist transformation cannot be achieved through the state, because the very existence of the state, thinking of the state as a particular form of social organization, the very existence of the state as a form of social organization that is separated both from production and from social self-determination, that the existence of the state depends upon the reproduction of capital. No? It is bound to promote the accumulation of capital to ensure its own reproduction, and as such, it cannot be a form of anti-capitalist organization. Rather, the state is the integration of radical protest into the logic of capital. So anti-capitalist politics must also be anti-state politics. With that, I don't want to say that no social improvements can be achieved through the state. I think they can be in many cases. And there may even be good reasons for preferring one politician or one party to another in a certain situation. But the state cannot break the dynamic of the destruction that is capital. It can only try to strengthen it. And for me, the clearest elaboration of that argument is through the old German state derivation debate in the 1970s, which focused on the relation between capital and the state as forms of social organization. Thinking that radical transformation, social transformation, could be achieved through the state has, as we know, been a tragic disaster. The third thing I think we can say about relearning hope is then, of course, that hope must start from below, from our own struggles, from our own longings, from our own angers. Hope is hope against. It's not hope for. It's hope against, or it is better, it is hope against and beyond the system that is destroying it. It is hope against the way in which social relations are currently organized. It is a movement that starts from where we are within the system, goes against that which stands against us and attacks us against the system, and opens up in dreams and in actions different worlds that follow a different logic of organization. So that hope then is a moving be in, against, and beyond the existing capitalist society. And that means that it is an anti-identitarian moving, that it is a moving against all limits, all identities. Hopeless anger takes refuge in identity. What marks the rise of right-wing anger at the moment is that it is identitarian, based on the reinforcement and discrimination against perceived identities. And this ensures that for all its anger, it remains within the capitalist system which it proclaims to hate. For capitalism is a system of containment, is a system of identifying. So if we say revolutionary hope is the hope that is based on that which is not yet, on the present existence of that which is not yet, then we're saying that hope overflows identities, not in the sense of denying them, but in the sense of going beyond them. The Zapatista movement, for example, has never enclosed itself within a self-definition of being an indigenous movement. It has said from the beginning that it is a movement of indigenous composition, struggling for humanity. And I think this helps us as well to think the question of the working class. Because class is the result of classification, of identification. This is what you are. You are working class. This is what you are going to do all your life. Work, in the sense of labour, is the enclosure of human activity. It's containment within that which directly or indirectly contributes to the production of value and surplus value. And the problem with the traditional concept of working class is that it is an identitarian concept, the concept of the class as labourers. And I think it is only when we think of the anti-identitarian revolt that this concept contains or seeks to contain. In other words, it is only when we think of the revolt of all of us who are forced into this class and forced to labour that the idea becomes revolutionary. We overflow from being working class. We are anti-labour and anti-class. But the traditional institutions of the working class build upon the identity of working class and in so enclose the class within the system. Hope lies rather in the revolt against labour and against class, so that we can perhaps talk of the revolutionary subject, if we want to talk about the revolutionary subject, as the anti-working, anti-class. Possibly, some people suggest, as the proletariat against the working class, or as the rabble, or as the subject without name, which is, or as the uncontainable. But, okay, so I suppose I'm saying we have to relearn. We can't give up on revolutionary hope. We have to relearn the idea of revolutionary hope. And we can't just reproduce the old traditions. We have to rethink it. We've got certain things we can hang on to and saying, well, no, it's not that history is on our side. It is not simply the revolt of the working class, but we have to go further. We have to keep on thinking. We have to keep on trying. We have to And it can't just be a question of activism. We have to overflow from that and say, okay, activism, and all that, of course, is struggling against oppression, it is struggling against capital, but at some point we have to pose the old problem of how do we, can we still think? Is there any way that we can still think of actually overcoming capitalism? And I think whatever we say about hope and revolution, we have to add, not enough. Not enough. Not enough, because we're not there yet, because we don't have the answers, because we still live in this dreadful society, because the streets of San Francisco are still so awful, so hopeless, and I think getting worse and worse. So we have to say not enough, which means, of course, that we must continue tomorrow. Thank you.